The UDR Cast is not affiliated and does not represent any 12-step fellowship. I, Bill Ward, the host of the UDR Cast, will be sharing my experience and my journey of recovery. That does include, but is not limited to, the literature contained in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous and the 12 Steps. Our guests will be sharing their own path to recovery and what has worked for them. The UDR Cast encourages and supports all paths to recovery. Welcome everybody to the UDR Cast. UDR stands for Uncover, Discover, and Recover. My name is Bill Ward, and I'm coming to you from the recovery capital of Canada, Calgary, Alberta. Here we are going to discuss everything recovery, different perspectives, different experiences, both with the people I know and with others from around the world. If you resonate with anything you've heard on this episode today, we ask that you share it with anyone who you think may benefit from it. If you have any questions or comments, please find us at billward.life and send us a message in the info section. We'll get back to you as soon as we can. If you are interested in more recovery content, you can find the buttons for the YouTube channel and other social media outlets on the homepage, and you will be redirected to those platforms. We can recover, one person, one family, one community at a time. So today, I'm Bill Ward, and today our guest is Alisha. Alisha is a friend of mine that's been in recovery now I've seen her for about 3 years, and she just took 2 years. She's got about 2 years and 3 or 4 months. And, as we talk about the fellowship of the program, I believe we're kind of friends in the fellowship of the Spirit today, the fellowship of God and fellowship of Creator. So I'm really happy to have Alisha back here for the third time. We've kind of tried to get this rock and rolling 3 different times, but my computer kept messing up. But she's been very patient and willing to come back, and today's the day. We got a new sound guy here that actually understands what's going on, and I don't have to do it, and so that's pretty amazing. So Alisha, I just want to welcome you back, and thank you again for coming here, and it's awesome to see you.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. Yeah, my name is Alisha. Born in Calgary, like Bill mentioned, just a little bit over a couple years of sobriety and recovery.
Okay, that's good. So here we go. Basically, Alisha, what I want to do is I want to kind of go back into your history, into your life, and kind of walk through, what it was like and walk up to where we are today. And so that's what we'll do. So, you're born and raised in Calgary. You came from, basically a good home. Everything was pretty much fine and dandy. And there was really no reason for you to have any deep-rooted trauma like a lot of us do, at least in your early childhood. Can you give us a description of kind of how your early childhood was and what your upbringing was like?
Yeah. So my childhood growing up, my family, we moved around a lot. I lived in England for a couple of years. I think I've been to over 25 different schools. Looking back, it was kind of like that geographical change thing. My father always worked a lot. He was always, providing for the family, and my mother stayed at home with my brother and I. My mother drinks heavily. I wouldn't be the one to qualify her as an alcoholic, but she definitely has some heavy drinker tendencies, and that's kind of been a struggle in the family dynamic for many years. Parents didn't get along really too well. The drinking came in between their relationship, mine and my mother's relationship. My dad's family, I've just recently learned my dad's family was plagued by alcoholism. His father was an alcoholic. And then I just recently learned as well through conversation with my dad that my dad's mother was actually addicted to prescription pills. So that was kind of interesting to learn. Gave me a little bit more history about where I came from.
Awesome. So when you were in school, let's kind of go through your junior high years. I know for me, That's where I kind of got the first taste of doing drugs. I started smoking pot. I started drinking. I wouldn't say it was out of control by any means at that point, but I know that I did like the experience of ease and comfort that I got from even cigarettes. I remember getting buzzes off of cigarettes when I was really young. And what was your experience with your junior high? Did you experiment in junior high?
So towards the end of junior high, I did. When I was in junior high, I played a lot of sports. I tried to find my group of friends, but I floated around. I got along with many different people. I never really felt like I belonged. There was a group considered maybe the cool group of kids. And the first time that I did ever drink was with this group of kids around 16 years old.
It's funny you mention that you felt like you didn't belong. That is kind of like a theme with most alcoholics and addicts. It's not, across the board, I would say, but it is fairly common. And as you mentioned that, I had that very same experience being First Nations in a predominantly white world. There was many aspects where I felt I didn't belong either. And very similar to you, there was a connection with friends just using mildly when I was in junior high, and that's kind of when the seed gets planted, I think. And so as we kind of walk into your high school years, and I know as you were, I think about 17 or so is when you had no choice but to use some drugs. Can you walk us through maybe those teenage years and take us to how you first kind of got introduced to these opioids?
So when I was in high school, that's when, I didn't drink so much, but I definitely was addicted to the lifestyle and, having people over and the attention, all the other stuff that I tried to, fill the void with. So as I go through high school, I ended up dropping out. I was smoking a lot of weed and just, involved in, partying a lot. I ended up having a job. One day I was on my way to work and I got sideswiped by a one-ton moving truck on Deerfoot. And I had never tried opiates before. It was through this accident. I had brain damage and had pretty heavy injuries. Ended up in a neck brace, in and out of surgeries. These injuries still plague me today, and I still suffer with the chronic pain from it. That's where I was introduced to opiates, benzos. Yeah, and I didn't know the full implications of what it was to take these chemical drugs at that point.
So you were prescribed these drugs, correct, for your pain?
Yes.
How old were you?
I was 17.
So you're 17, getting an accident. Now you're prescribed opioids or whatever, what you had mentioned there. And at first, did it work for the pain?
At first, I actually refused to take them because I'd never really taken a lot of pills. I had lived on my own. My mom and my dad weren't around. I had a friend mention, looking back, an ex-boyfriend mentioned that his mom got hooked on the pain pills. He's like, I don't think it's a good idea. And it wasn't until my pain got so bad, I couldn't function. I had no other choice. When I started to take the pain pills at first, I did take them as directed in the beginning.
When your boyfriend had mentioned that his mom had gotten hooked on opioids kind of in a similar fashion, did it raise any flags in your head that, maybe this could happen to me, or was it a non-thought?
It wasn't really a thought. He just said she'd struggled with pills in general. So I also didn't think, oh, well, that can't happen to me, right? I'm an exception to the rule. I'm a snowflake.
Yeah, and at that point in your life, you'd never been really addicted to anything, and we don't know the power of substances. But as you kind of progress in these injuries, probably affected you psychologically, and now you're starting to take drugs. Did it kind of manifest what we talk about, the spiritual malady? Did it kind of add fuel to the spiritual malady for you?
I think what added for the spiritual malady was while I was taking these pills, I felt like I was losing myself, and there was a very fine line of using this medication for my pain and then seeing the effects that I had. which was I was basically numbed out. Yes, my physical pain was numbed out, but as like that spiritual malady starts to come in, and I see that, like, I'm not feeling all too well, I'm starting to take these pills to make myself feel better.
And I like what you said. You started not being yourself. So now you're kind of changing, and you, in a way that's not conducive to happy life. And then you kind of become more dependent on these things. When did it go from, from pain to a little bit unmanageable, and then describe the downhill decline of how the use went and where it took you?
Yeah, so there's actually a specific incident, or like a moment, I guess I would say, where, like my father and I had a fight over the phone. Looking back, like, I don't recall exactly what I did, but I know I definitely had a part to play in that. And my dad was upset, and like, like from a young age, all I wanted was that approval and validation from my father. And like this fight, I just wanted to numb out these feelings, and that's when I crossed the line of like totally abusing the pain medication. I had looked to my ex-fiance at the time, and he had previously had an opiate addiction. He never explained much about it, so I didn't know how it could have a grip on somebody, but I asked him how I could sniff this pill, and from that point, it progressed really quickly. I started doctor hopping. I'd run out of my prescription pills in a bit, because I wasn't just supplying myself, I was supplying my fiance. And at the time, like, I struggled with a lot of chronic pain. So I was like using that justification for all this other stuff, when really I wasn't just medicating my physical pain, I was medicating that spiritual malady as well, or trying to.
So as we're walking along the timeline of your life, did you not get in another accident at some point in this process? Were you already using some of the drugs, and were they becoming unmanageable, and then you got in another accident?
Yeah, I got into another accident. I got T-boned, I got rear-ended, and my car did a 360. Yeah, at that point, I had been using some of the medications, not how they're prescribed, and also starting to like pick up on using cocaine at that point.
Okay, so as your friend circle, as you have all your friends and you start using, what happened to your friend circle? Did you lose, or did you step away from all your good quality friends and kind of start moving into a different type of friend group?
Oh, definitely. You're a product of your environment, right? I knew that, all my lifelong friends, or, friends from junior high and elementary, like, they wouldn't condone this sort of thing. So I found an environment which fit what I wanted to do, right? And from there, like, I remember, like I remember different groups of people that I hung out with. I have an ex, had an ex at one point. We did a lot of cocaine, and I remember, and that was before actually the accidents. Like, and like I can see how every time like I picked up a new drug or something like that, I had a different group of friends that was acceptable. Like each drug was acceptable to them.
And so as you're going through this, alcohol wasn't a really big issue by the sounds of it?
No, like, so that first time that I drank in junior high, I drank a lot, and I scared myself because I had no control over my body, and I did not like that feeling. I remember like drinking and throwing up, and like I always had this big resentment towards my mom for her, being a heavy drinker or somewhat resembling an alcoholic. Like it caused me a lot of pain, and I knew that I didn't want to be like her, right? So, but in retrospect, I just used a solid substance rather than a liquid substance.
Okay, and the reason I ask that is because I know later in your story, alcohol was a primary cause of one of your relapses. But when we get there, we'll get there. But as we're kind of where we're at with you walking through your life there, where did it take you? Where did your drug use start taking you? Like, you lived, in a nice family home. You've kind of moved in with some boyfriends, and where did it end up taking you?
Yeah, so I recall like the place that I had lived in, my ex-fiance had moved in, and then I had crossed that line, started crushing up my pills, starting to sniff them, go doctor hopping. At this point, doctor hopping so I can sell these prescriptions so I can get more money, starting to pawn off my belongings, not able to pay rent in between places. Like recently some new memories have come up. Like, I used to live out of a storage locker. I lived in a tent beside the Calgary Zoo station, in and out of jail, and recently this memory popped up. I remember like calling my family and being like, oh, I'm in jail. Like, can you get me out? The first time that I was in jail, my dad drove all the way down to Edmonton and he bailed me out, and he waited like 6 hours for me to get released, and it took them more than 8. So we had to drive all the way back. But I didn't even remember that till just last week. So that was pretty crazy. But yeah, so in and out of jail, I had some pretty serious charges. I was looking at 7 years jail time, and if and anybody that was to know me before, and I think this happens with a lot of people, no one ever thought that I was going to become a heroin addict, right? Like, I had a healthy, like I had family, I had a home, I was good academically, I was on sports teams, like, yeah, lots of pain. I'd steal from my family, I would lie, manipulate. Yeah, and I started to get more and more involved into crime. And like through the crime I had some consequences, which I had to be a little bit accountable, because I had that fear of going to jail for a substantial amount of time. So that helped in some ways. However, those weren't my bottoms.
Did the thought of powerlessness ever cross your mind? Well, I know for me, like I've learned a lot in the program based out of the literature, and I can see myself in the literature, like hands down, no problem. But as I was living my life, I didn't really understand the illness, and I didn't even understand powerlessness. I just knew that I was always getting high, and I didn't really want to get high, but then I got high, and my brain said, well, you wanted to get high. And did you ever identify that, this was not working out, and that you actually had no control and the power of choice in this? Did you ever identify that?
It wasn't, it took a long time to get to a point where I seen that I had a problem with it. And at that point, I definitely wouldn't have said I was powerless. I don't even think that term was in my vocabulary at that point. But, when I tried to use other substances like methamphetamine to come off fentanyl, and then morphine, and like I can't stop. And I'm just thinking, like, the problem is, like, if I can just get stopped, I'll be good. Looking back, like, I thought if I could just get stopped, I'd be good. But like, it never occurred to me that maybe I can't stay stopped on my own.
Yeah, and that was exactly my experience too. So what was it like living down by the river in a tent?
I remember waking up one morning completely wet, soggy, dope sick, and the bylaw officers came, and I would say they knocked on the tent, but you can't really knock on a tent. And they're like, "Excuse me, we're gonna have to ask you to vacate." I was like, "Or what?" They're like, "Well, we'll give you a fine." I was like, "Do you see where I live, bro? Like, the fine's not gonna do much." Yeah, and I mean, like, there's so many times, and I find, like, the longer and longer that I've been sober, the more and more these memories keep flooding. The more I keep digging in, the more these memories come. I also used to live in a tent behind Marlborough Mall. Yeah, like, and I forgot about those times, right? Living in and out of cars, in and out of different people's places.
Being a woman in that environment is pretty risky, right? Did you ever worry about your safety, like sexual assault or anything like that? Was that ever like a worry, or did you have to fend off anything like that?
So as well as a drug addiction, I struggled with toxic relationships. So I always had the biggest, baddest boyfriend with me. So like, it wasn't really, I never felt too concerned with my safety with other people. That did come up in those particular relationships. But yeah, fortunately, like, and I've heard unfortunate stories of many women out there and unfortunate things happening. I don't know if it was kind of a blessing in disguise that, I was always surrounded by someone.
Well, that's good. That's good. So as we kind of keep walking along here, where do we go from there? You're pretty much homeless and destitute and having bylaw officers knocking on the tent and like, where do we go from there? Like, how did you find your path to the rooms?
Oh, well, Bill, it took a really long time, right? So throughout all this time, I'm still dealing with the lawsuit from these accidents. I'm still trying to go to chiropractic, physio, acupuncture, because like my body's in so much pain. I knew that if my body's in so much pain, I'm gonna keep using all these substances. So I kept going to all my appointments, and I go see my psychologist, and I'd be fucked up for all this. Like, I remember like the first time my psychologist was like, I think you have a problem with substance abuse. And I was like, okay. She's like, so I think you should go to treatment. So I went to a private treatment center. I went to detox first. I got put onto Suboxone, and then I went to treatment. I'd never been to treatment before. I didn't know what to expect. This was a private treatment center. It was kind of like a little vacation, to be honest. I learned a lot of things about myself. That's where that self-knowledge of illness nothing thing came in, because I learned all this stuff, and I was like, okay, so I've been stopped for a bit. I've learned about myself. I've learned about some of my defense mechanisms. I'm good. And then I go back out, and I ended up relapsing. I ended up going back to detox. Ended up going back to that same treatment center. At this point, I'm trying to fight for a hip surgery I'd been declined of getting, which I knew my life was not going to get better if I kept living in excruciating pain. So I fought tooth and nail for this appeal for this surgery. And the reason why the surgeon didn't want to give me the surgery is because of my opiate addiction. Because his fear was that when he put me under, that I was going to die if I was on opiates, because my heart would stop. So because my surgeon said I needed to be clean, I went to detox. And I was like, oh, my problem's just opiates. But then I was still doing speed. Which yeah, and speed does not agree with me, that's for sure. Yeah, at that point, I end up having my hip surgery. That was a whole other thing. So my hip surgery, I'd been on Suboxone for a while, and I knew that they were going to have to put me on painkillers. I had 5 months abstinence at this point, knew nothing of the program, nothing of meetings, knew nothing about any of that at this point. And then I got my surgery. Looking back, when they gave me the opiates, that's where that allergy was off. And like I couldn't stop in the hospital. I was calling and getting dope. I relapsed in the hospital. I go back to my dad's. I'm there for a bit. I just kept going, and I couldn't walk around or do anything because I couldn't walk. So and this is how unmanageable and how powerless I was. My dad's on an acreage, and I get this guy to drop off dope at the end of the driveway, and I'm trying to sneak out of my dad's house at night and hobble down the driveway with my crutches. And, I ended up as soon as I was able to walk again, I told my dad I was leaving, and I never came back, and I was back on the streets. And at this point, I had actually burnt myself to the point where like I felt like I was gonna die if I kept using. I had no more energy to do the crime, to keep going for the chase of calling the dealer, getting the dope, and just that circle, that vicious circle that we talk about when we work the steps. I was stuck in that, and I just I don't know, I admitted defeat, right? I remember the one particular night, my ex-fiance and I were in and out of our friend's place, and I had spent all my money on dope, and I looked at him and I was like, I'm gonna die if I keep using it. And I believe that was a God shot, right? And I remember calling the dope team, and it was the middle of winter, and I was like, I need to go to detox. And they're like, okay. And he's like, what do you mean, you're leaving me? I was like, I just can't do this. And I didn't think of anything again. I just thought I had to get stopped, right? So going through detox, I was there for a couple of days, and they said a bed had opened up. They're like, have you thought about anything else? I'm like, well, no. I just need to get stopped, right? I just need to stop going through withdrawals, and then I'm not going to want to do drugs anymore. So they're like, well, have you went to like a trauma-based treatment center? Have you actually like, done this work before? I'm like, no. They're like, so at that point I was like, okay, yeah, I'm willing to do something different for this, right? Nothing else I've done has worked. So it was through going to treatment that I was introduced to meetings, and that's where I found my solution today.
So you mentioned you're going to a trauma-based treatment center. And by the sounds of it, they do trauma work. I've been around the program now a little over 6 years, and I see a lot of these women treatment centers that do the trauma-based treatment. And I see them not really focus on the program of recovery, the 12 steps. And to me, the trauma-based stuff is a component of the step 4 and 5. And unless these women work the full program, if they're the real deal alcoholic drug addict like you and I are, they almost always invariably relapse. So as you do your trauma-based treatment, you start going to meetings, you start getting introduced. What did you start seeing, and what was going through your mind as you go to these meetings that are mandatory for you? Did you have a feeling like, okay, the treatment's going to be enough and I won't need to work the steps? And if so, what actually made you want to work the steps?
Yeah, so looking back, when I first came to the meetings, I seen that everybody was laughing, having a good time, and that people were talking about things and had a solution. And at first I didn't really take that too heavy. I was like, oh, well, maybe that's their stuff. I hadn't thought about doing the program or the 12 steps. I'm like, oh, well, I have to go to these meetings. I tried a couple different fellowships, and it's there where I heard people like yourself or people like Jesse, people like Robbie or Sammy who shared the solution was in the 12 steps. My first meeting was a speaker meeting, and that was who I asked to be my first sponsor, and I related to the feelings and the struggles and the toxic relationships and all the pain and suffering that she'd been through, and she was standing in front of me, a sober lady, she didn't resemble the person that she talked about, so I got a sponsor. It was encouraged that we got a sponsor. I didn't know even what that entailed.
So what it entailed, I guess, was somebody that took you through the steps. But I think often one of the misconceptions with people that are new to recovery, and even people that are in recovery, they almost use a sponsor as a friend to just bullshit with. And we see the results of a sponsor that's just a friend to bullshit with. Those people usually still live in a spiritual malady. Most of them eventually use again. So what's been the relationship like with you and your sponsors, and what does actually sponsorship mean from you as a recovering addict? What did you have to do as a sponsee to actually find a solution?
Yeah, so I had to, first and foremost, I had to be honest with myself about my predicament. I had to be open-minded to take some suggestions and do some things I'd never done before. And I had to be willing, and I had to keep moving forward with the steps, right? What those relationships look like with myself and a sponsor, like my own sponsor, I think it's really important that there's a teacher-student dynamic, right? A sponsor is somebody who shares their experience, strength, and hope, and who can teach me and show me how they've applied these steps and these principles in their life. I try to do the same thing for my sponsees.
I love that you said, I think that there needs to be a teacher-student dynamic. And to me, those are the most successful sponsee-sponsor relationships that I see. I know there's going to be a lot of people that disagree with that, but I don't really give a fuck because I'm a data collector. I see what fucking works. I see what doesn't work. And what you're saying is, fundamentally the truth. Student-teacher relationship. And if the friendship is developed too soon, and it's up to God to develop the friendship anyway, but if there's a friendship built too soon at like the step 4, 5, 6, 7, then it really dismantles what the relationship can actually do. And then the sponsee who hasn't had their selfish self-centeredness smashed out of yet, their ego reasserts itself and they become like equal in a sense that they know the same amount as the sponsor, and then the relationship gets all messy and it doesn't work anymore, right? So I really am happy that you said that. So as we kind of are back in your story, you're working some program with your sponsor, you're doing some things that are right, you're gaining momentum. I remember, I'm going to think back when I was watching you growing in the program. You're hanging out with a friend, and we both know this one woman, and you guys were hanging out and things were going well. And then I remember I was running a big book study, and then I believe it was one night after that big book study, you guys had the wise idea that it would be good to go have a few drinks, right? And that's why I brought up earlier that alcohol wasn't really an issue. So I want to ask you, what was going through your head through the big book study and then that night where you decided this would be a great idea?
Yeah, so actually, just to clarify, I had my sponsor, but we hadn't worked the steps up until this relapse. I started the step work after my relapse on alcohol. So I remember, many conversations with my friend, and we're like, oh, we're heroin addicts, or we're drug addicts, we're not alcoholics. Like, I could have just one drink, and to be honest, looking back, I never really tried to have just one drink before, right? If I did, the whole reason I didn't drink a lot is because I scared myself the first time because I was fucked. So I recall, we would joke around and be like, oh, well, maybe just one drink. And we're like, no drinks. We already, when they say, people plan their relapse or they're reaching for that drink way before, that's exactly what happened, right? It was already decided, the day before, that we were going to go to the big book study and we were going to go out to Cowboys and we were going to go dance, right? We were going to go dance. That's the justification and the delusion that we lived in, right? We're just going to go dance. And I remember it was kind of like God almost interjected. There was a member at the big book study and it's like, oh, well, do you guys want to come to I think it was some late night meeting. And then we're like, no, we'd already been to Value Village and picked up our fancy little outfits. And I remember being there and for myself, and I didn't drink a lot that night. And that was the thing that almost fucked me over because I justified it. When I got kicked out of treatment, and so my girlfriend at the time, she went out that night and did her own thing. I ended up having, 3 drinks, and I'm like, oh, that's not bad. I could control it, right? And then we go back to the treatment center and we end up getting kicked out. And at that time, I didn't even see it as a relapse. I'm like, oh, it's not even bad. I'm like, oh, I just drank. It didn't show up on my drug test. And they're like, no, you drank, Alisha. We have to kick you out. So
did that launch you into actually working the program, or where was the turning point?
So when my sponsor was like, Alisha, what would you have done if there was anything else in front of you? She's like, you came into this program so desperate, so broken. Are you going to risk your life? So that, the prime example, look what happened. My girlfriend went off and did some other stuff, right? Because that ended up being in front of her. That could have easily been me, right? Maybe I can control it for a couple of times, but if I'm the real deal addict or alcoholic, that time will come where I'm without defense against that first drink, right?
So then, needless to say, you got down to business and started working this program. And it's safe to say, because I watched it and we've talked about it, that you were doing many things in that first round of recovery, including not working the steps, but having a sponsor. But you were doing a number of other, behaviors that weren't really conducive to, working a good program that usually ends up in a relapse. So now you hit this new bottom and you start working a program and tell us how that went.
Yeah, so like you mentioned, and I like to share this because I think a lot of people struggle with this when they come into the program, at least, from my data that I've gathered from being around the rooms for a little bit. So, I wasn't using substances, but at this point I'm filling the void through the opposite sex and through attention and at that point, again, I'm so immersed in the problem, I can't even see that there's something wrong with it until I get burnt. And through that pain, I'm like, okay, something needs to change.
Wow. And I love that you had mentioned that because, I've sponsored, fucking upwards 250, 300 people, and I've seen a lot of people relapse. I've seen a lot of people die. And the number one reason I see people relapse is usually from the opposite sex. Mm-hmm. So I've also, in the big book, it talks about when sex is troublesome, we jump the harder into helping others as it cures the imperious urge. And from some of the other material that I've studied, other books, and, I study a lot of different things to try to help myself understand this illness and the psychology of an alcoholic addict and human being in general. What I've learned is the desire for sexualization is the most powerful desire that the human being has. Mm-hmm. And when we release this energy in a purely physical form, it actually will deplete willingness and willpower. So how does that work with the alcoholic addict? Well, we want to do anything to stay sober. We put the drink down, we put the drug down. We still have an illness, and the energy of this illness wants to come out somehow, some way. And the number one way that it wants to come out is through sex relation, mm-hmm. which is why so many men and women get so fucking horny when they're 2 and 3 months sober, and they're like, I just need to get laid. So then they go get laid. And then what they don't understand is now their willingness and willpower has been depleted to a point where that target of staying sober, the bullseye of staying sober, now gets very foggy and fuzzy. And the mind can still think that that's still my target. But the physiology of this whole energy structure of a human actually depletes the willingness and willpower. And that target of staying sober gets really fucking foggy. And then essentially they end up going out and drinking because now they're right back in the spiritual malady. But if you can harness this energy and actually transmute it, it's called sexual energy transmutation, and you focus it on something purposeful. So what would be the purposeful thing that an addict or alcoholic would focus it in on when they're new in those early stages? It would be to their recovery. And then they focus it there, then it really breeds and builds something that's unexplainable, which is why, we talk about stay out of fucking relationships for the first year, because usually you're just trying to fill something within yourself that you need to fill with fucking God, and it doesn't work with other people. Mm-hmm. So I'm really, really happy that you brought that up, because there's a lot of women that have, their spiritual malady is relationship addiction, sex addiction, shopping addiction. Like, the spiritual malady can show up in many different ways. And God in our program really does solve all those areas if we work a solid program and we're willing to walk forward. So you're working the steps, you're working a solid set of steps. Tell us about, the steps and what they did for you, and how the big book has really worked for you, and how the fellowships worked, and really give the newcomer an idea of what the steps actually did to you. What did the fellowship do for you?
Yeah, I think a line that sticks out to me in the big book, when it's talking about what at first seemed to be a flimsy reed ended up being like the loving hand of God, right? When I first came into the rooms, I had no idea that today in my life was going to depend on this book, and it does, and I'm super grateful for it, right? I often introduce myself at meetings, and I introduce myself and I say that I have a design for living, right? And that comes from these 12 steps and through this program and through the fellowship. The fellowship gave me somewhere that I found unity. I found a bunch of other people who related to me. I seen that I wasn't fucking different. I'm not a fucking snowflake, and it was through the fellowship and seeing other people that they have recovery, that they have a life worth living. They have their families back. They have a peace of mind. They no longer obsess about drinking and using. Like, their lives are manageable. And at first it was that attraction rather than promotion that's what pulled me in. That's what I seen in my sponsor. That's why, and I think it's important to find somebody who has qualities or something that you want, because I wouldn't have, my sponsor's suggestions wouldn't have had any depth and weight if I didn't see that she had a solution, right? And, going through the steps, today, I often mentioned to my friends or my sponsees, like it's a toolkit, right? I have these tools that I can use for anything. And you know, as I've went on, like after my first set of steps, which released the obsession, and I started, and then, well, it was only then that I was able to dig deeper into the sex relations, right? At first I was too fucked up, too cloudy. Like I needed to have a period of time, right? And like I've mentioned, more and more memories keep popping up for me now. But yeah, the steps are a vital part of my life today. And like, you know, when I say it's a design for living, like I can use these steps for anything, whether it's sex relations, money, financial insecurity, drug or substance addiction. Like you can use these steps for anything. That's why if you go and you look it up, there's 12-step meetings for so many things. There's a freaking 12 steps for Chapstick Anonymous, for crying out loud. Like
I like that you mentioned, substance. Your first time through the book, you relieved yourself of the obsession of the substance. And I often say at meetings and on my online meeting and podcasts and speaker things that I do, get through your first set of steps and relieve yourself of the problem that you came here with, which is, I'm powerless over a substance. That's exactly what the book says. It says it will enable you to find this power greater than yourself that will solve your problem. And my problem is I'm addicted to a substance and I can't stop using it. And as I go through my first set of steps, I actually get relieved from that problem. But the literature also says that the bottle is a symptom, that the surface is hardly scratched when I hang up the booze and the drugs. Then that I really have to get down to causes and conditions. And what's really the problem? The book talks about it, man. And it says that selfish self-centeredness is the root of our problem. And once we kind of start understanding that, like you do today, and you got into your second set of steps, and we start actually digging into the spiritual malady, which is our insecurities and our belief systems and all of these things. So it's two totally different looks. One, for me, when I first did step 2 and step 3, it was like, okay, step 2, what the fuck ever, I'm going to believe, and I do believe. What is step 3? I didn't even know what step 3 was. You ask me what step 3 is today, and I think the whole program actually allows me to practice what step 3 is. And it's not an actual, just an idea of what I think it is. Through the directions in the book, I'm able to practice turning my will and my life over through the directions in any given circumstance in my life. So what was step 3 like when you first went through it in your early recovery for somebody new that is just doing step 3 and they think that they're turning their will and their life over? And what does step 3 look like for you today?
So when I first came into the program, right, like I just wanted to be relieved of my drug and alcohol problem. So, and I didn't understand that there was like a lot deeper meaning behind the steps, like that it was a design for living. So when I read step 3 at first, I thought it was turning my will and my life over regarding my recovery. So that means I held on to sex relations, I held on to financial insecurity, I held on to all these other things, right? So step 3 in the beginning is a decision to move forward with the rest of the steps. And it wasn't until I actually went through step 4 and step 5 with a sponsor and I start to see the difference between Alisha's will and God's will, right? Alisha's will is always in collision with people, places, and things. It's like I'm swimming against the current, right? My will is always exhausting, right? God's will is effortless. And it wasn't until I did a step 4 and do the step 5 and write out my 4th column that I see this. And as I've moved forward in the steps, step 3 has become a lot more than that. Step 3 is a huge part of the program, right?
Okay, and I believe you are correct. Step 3 is a huge part. It kind of is the whole program in a nutshell. When we look at steps 4 and 5, we're looking at what's my will and how does it cause my failure in my own life. And if I keep living in my will, I will pick up again because my will actually manifests the spiritual malady and just makes it worse and worse and worse. And in the doctor's opinion, it says unless this person has an entire psychic change, there is very little hope of his recovery. And in that 4 and 5 process, we get to see what my will is and what needs to be fucking changed, which is great, right? And you had mentioned doing the 5 with your sponsor so she can really show you this stuff. And it's not always a fun process because they're showing you shit your pride doesn't really want to hear and things that got to change that you've used your whole life. You talked about defense mechanisms. I've been using these things my whole life. They're my weapons. They're my way to get through everything. But then in step 6, we got to be entirely willing to have these things removed. And to me, step 6 is like the basic, to me, my opinion, and I've been on the same kick for fucking years. Step 6 is the most important step to understand the theory and the willingness and the honesty required behind it to practice it at fucking all given times as best that you can as a human being. But the actual directions for this step are contained within the step 10 actual directions. So when we talk about the willingness to have these things removed, you'd lived in a lot of defects for a long time. What did it take for you to finally really want to have these things removed and really try at a high level? I talk about water finds its own level. And if you want high water level recovery, you got to do what high level water recovery people do. So what did you do to get to where you're at in these relinquishment of the defects of character?
So it took me a lot of pain. I went against everyone's suggestions of getting in a relationship early. And I got into a relationship at 3 months sober. And that's where all these character defects were coming up. And, it was through all that pain that I seen something needed to change. And I didn't really understand the full implication of step 6. The big book doesn't say very much, but it's actually such an important step because if I'm not willing to work on these things, there's no change that's possible, right? And it's not that I can't remove these character defects, right? Just like I wasn't able to remove my obsession. I wasn't able to get better on my own, right? If you're the real deal addict or alcoholic, like it says in step 1, you need a higher power. You need something greater than yourself. In step 6 is where I bring my higher power into that. And, I pray for the willingness for these things to be removed, but I do have to be honest with myself and I can't fool myself about the values of some of these fucking character defects I'm acting out on. And most of the time it is through pain, right? And I find like the big glaring defects, those ones are usually like, okay, like, I don't want people to see me angry. I don't want to be angry, but it's the little ones, like the subtle ones that like I keep getting away with. And I'm like, oh, maybe it's not that bad. Maybe Alisha has this, right?
Yeah, man, that's amazing. So as we kind of walk through these steps here, I know we've talked before and you've had some major breakthroughs with the step 9 stuff. Comparatively speaking to me, I haven't had like big, huge awakenings in the step 9s. I've had some good experiences, like profound experiences, but some people like you and Gord and there's others that really think that step 9 is just an amazing step. Can you describe a little bit of why you think step 8 and 9 are so important, what they've done in your life?
And this is my personal opinion. Step 9 is the practical application of all the other steps before. So I come into this program selfish, self-centered, and through going through step 6 and being willing to have these removed and bringing my higher power into this, and then getting to step 7 and having the action part, right? God can remove mountains, but you have to bring a shovel. So I had to do the work to work towards these ideals and to build character. And it was through having that change. So not only the personality change, but actively like working on my character, that I actually could stand before people like my family and stand a different person and actually mend that behavior and mend that harm, right? I wouldn't have been able to do that without working through the other steps, right? I wouldn't have had that change in place. And I think that's why for myself, like step 9s have been so big, is because I did dig really deep, right? And I did have that change in character. And like, You know, it's a really beautiful thing, because I came into this program thinking I just had to stop stop drinking and drugging, and today I have peace and serenity, right? And that's pretty freaking amazing.
Do you have any examples of one or two of the amends that have really blown you away?
Yeah. So I have a couple different experiences. I have some recent and some that I will share. So I often like to talk about, like, my biggest amends was with my father. My mom had moved away when I was 18, and my dad was kind of left here with my brother and I. So he ended up being a parent that dealt with me and my struggles of addiction on the forefront, right? You know, I harmed my dad in many ways, right? I harmed that relationship in so many ways. I wasn't a reliable daughter, sister. You know, I lied, I manipulated, I stole his time. You know, he was constantly worried that I was going to overdose or be back in jail, thought I was going to die, you know, and so it was explained to me and pressed upon me that step 9 is not a fucking apology. It is accountability and ownership. It's the change, right? So it was around my 1-year mark that my dad was like, hey, I see this personality change and it's really nice. And he knows nothing of this program. And if you've been through the big book, you know, like, that personality change, that's a fucking goal right there, right? You know, at that point, you know, I'd been sober for periods of time before, you know, 5 months, a couple of months here and there. So for myself, I wanted to make sure that, you know, my amend had depth and weight. Also, like, in the beginning part of my recovery, like, I'd still been lying to my dad about where I was really at, like, maybe with financials, or I was borrowing money when really I shouldn't have been. So at this point when my dad said I had this personality change, you know, I checked myself. I'm like, you know what? I'm not acting out in any of these things. And I felt like it was time to make that amends. The amends with my father was one of the biggest amends. You know, he's seen that personality change. And so a couple of my other experiences with amends, actually a little bit with my amends with my father. So that's an amends I take very seriously. So when I asked my father what other ways I affected him, you know, it was hard to hear, right? It was kind of like getting kicked in the stomach, and just knowing and seeing full force, like, and hearing the ways that I affected him, right? Coming into this program, I never thought about anyone else. And here I am, you know, hearing how I affected my father, and again, all the sleepless nights. And when I asked him what I could do to mend this, to make this right, you know, he asked me to spend more time with my family. So every week, since I've made this amend, I've went to my father's for dinner. And it's not just on that day. I go whenever I have a chance. So my father's been going through some health concerns, and you know, that's always been one of my biggest fears, something happening with my father. Actually, the illness that he has was my biggest fear. So I had this thing happen when I was younger, and one of his friends had said that my dad was probably going to die from asbestosis. And that was a fear that, like, plagued me a lot as a young girl. Recently, we found out that my dad has asbestosis, and it has turned into this form of cancer. I don't know how to say it, but basically, like, the lining of his lungs is very thick, and he's basically drowning from the inside out, and he doesn't have very long to live. And you know, like I was just mentioning before we started doing this, that, you know, sitting down with my father and him explaining, like, his fears for my brother, you know, and like what that looks like. And he asked me to, like, you know, to stick by my brother and to be there. You know, like, that's the least I could do. And that's something that I want to do. And like, one of the biggest blessings out of this is, like, my father told me the other week that I'm the kid he's not worried about. Like, I used to be the kid he was worried about every single fucking day that he was going to get a call and I'd be overdosed on the street with a needle in my fucking arm, right? And like, that's all thanks to this program. I've had I've had some other experiences with amends. Like recently, I had an interesting experience with my mom. That one's been a little bit of a different kind of amends in some different ways, right? So I went to my mom and I tried to make an amends. She still drinks, and it didn't go very well the first time, but I remained willing. That's what we do. Step 8, we remain willing, and if not, we pray for the willingness. So I kept remaining willing to make this amend to my mom. I eventually, she doesn't live in Calgary, so I ended up making an amend over the phone. It was a very long-winded conversation. You know, like my mom and I were more friends than there was a mom-daughter dynamic, and I harmed her many ways. So I borrowed money from her, and there was some money wrapped up in my grandpa's estates, and things got a little messy. So when I asked my mom how to make this amend to her, the amount of money that she has in her mind is far exceeding anything that I believe it to be. So, I've made the financial amend of what I believe it to be, and I've asked my mom if we can sit down and, she says that there's some paperwork, we can go over it. I was fine. I was calling my sponsor and I was just explaining to her about some of the things that were going on with my mom. I feel like, I thought amends was about making the other people happy, but I learned through this experience, it's not about making the other person happy. It's about righting your wrongs and making sure you're good with yourself and God, right? And I can honestly sit here and say that I feel like I've mended that. And sometimes you're not going to meet people's expectations, and that's okay, right? So that was kind of a big takeaway. And also with remaining willing, right? So I've made my amends to my younger brother. That's been a relationship, we haven't been as close, but it's come apparent to me, again, in meditation and intuitive thought. It's I think I need to have a deeper conversation with my brother, because it's only now, having these conversations with my dad that I see, not only has my brother not had a mother around, he hasn't had a sister, and all the times that I told him that I was going to, I'm going to be right back. And I remember getting my dad and my brother helping me get a car going. My brother looked me in the eyes when they raised the garage door. And I was like, oh, I'll be right back. And my brother's like, are you? And I lied right to his face, right? And that didn't come to me until later, till I was working through the book with another alcoholic, that I remembered that, right? So now I feel like I can see my implications and how I affect him a little bit more. And that's the thing though, amends are a lifetime thing. So I see, in my experience and the data I've collected, is many people start to make a couple amends, but they don't fucking keep doing it, right? And that's been something that's been ingrained into me, to keep doing the amends, to keep being willing. Just because I made the amends with my dad, doesn't mean that it's done. It's a lifetime thing. I caused all these people so much harm. All I can do is keep trying.
Amazing. So we're going to just jump to step 12. I would like to talk about step 12. So I know for me, I like to say, the 12 steps give me a lot, but the 12th step, the one aspect of the 12th step, working with others, gives me everything. It allows me the program in large part is about self-examination. It allows me to do that self-examination at a level that the steps actually will never allow me to. I'm looking at myself, talking to myself, listening to myself. We talk about love and tolerance of others as our code. I'm also able to expand my heart, develop compassion, have some love for the person on the other side of the table. And at first, maybe it's judgment, maybe it's tolerate. But over time, that tolerate turns to tolerance. And we start to feel the other person's heart, and we start to have compassion. And I start to see me and you. And you and me. And the book in the 12 and 12, it talks about, talking with another person, our sponsor doing a 5, and then listening to somebody else. That is where we start to develop true kinship between man and God. It's the beginning of true kinship of man and God. And I've learned so much out of sponsorship about me, about you, about life. We talked about, before this podcast started tonight, about, You know, you can do as many fucking set of steps as you want, looking for the relief to get on with the business of being self-satisfied. All through the literature, it talks about working with others, being of service. Actually, in step 9, which you were just talking about, it says our real purpose, actually, is to fit ourselves to be of maximum service to God and the fellows about us. And as an alcoholic addict, Bill W., who wrote the book, he was really smart. He used my greatest deficit as an alcoholic addict to be my greatest asset. I can use my experience and my experience last week even. Not just my experience as a drug addict alcoholic, my experience in life. Because like you said, and you always allude to this in meetings, it's a design for living. So as we talk about the 12th step, you know, I know you're really big in the 12th step, and I know that it's changed your life. And these people who just redo the steps and redo the steps and redo the steps, they're missing that one piece, which is why they keep working the steps. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're missing the fucking piece, because this is the greatest piece of it all. Can you describe to the young ladies or ladies in general who are listening what this step means to you, what it's done for you, and the big message that you want to leave us with today?
Yeah, so when I first started sponsoring, I did it because it was the 12th step. As I started to sponsor a couple women, I started to see myself in them, which was pretty amazing. And like you mentioned, I was able to share the things that I've been through to help other people. You also mentioned earlier when we were talking about my sex conduct, when we struggle with sex relations, we throw ourselves further into the book. And I'm forever grateful, because that's something my first sponsor impressed upon me. And when I went through that first breakup in recovery, you know, like that's when I really started digging myself into helping other people. I come into this program completely selfish, self-centered, self-seeking. Like the big book talks about it, we work towards that altruistic plane, that selfless plane, right? And that's where step 12 comes in. You know, I'm trying to be there for other people, and I'm not sitting there thinking about myself all the time, right? And like you mentioned also, I'm trying to be of maximum service to God and my fellows.
How important is it that other women step up and help other women? Because you and I have both seen that a lot of women will come here and get recovery and hog it for themselves, which is fine. You know, we're not in control of this world, God is. But I think the message that I like to bring, and I know you do too, to whatever degree, is let's help. And like women with women, let's help them. So what's your opinion on yourself, or women helping women, or women not helping women?
You know, this is something that I stress upon to my sponsees and to friends in the program, right? I wouldn't have what I have today if a lady didn't take the time to sit down and go through the book and share her experience, strength, and hope with me. I'm forever grateful for that. And I'm forever somewhat in debt. And I pay that debt by continuing to pass on this message to other alcoholics and addicts. It was pressed upon me also that the amount of women in the rooms is already less than compared to the amount of men. And if you take that amount of women and half these women are keeping it to themselves, that doesn't leave very much room for strong sponsors. You know, today's sponsoring is my solution. And I never thought that my solution would be sponsoring, but the book alludes to it so many times, right? When anything else fails and everything else fails, working with one alcoholic and another alcoholic is what saves the day, right? If I'm struggling with a fear, if I'm struggling with a resentment, if I'm struggling with my sex conduct, the solution is always helping another addict. That's always the frickin' solution now. If you would have asked me, 3 years ago when I came into the program, would that be my solution? I'd be like, no, right? And I was also sharing this with one of my sponsees. Like, I always had a big heart, and I'd always, unsolicitedly help other people. But these were people who never wanted to help themselves. So when I was in my addiction, I'd try and help all these people. They never asked me for their help, and I'd always get burnt, right? And I have a big heart, and I do love to help people. And this program gives me a purpose through sponsoring. And it also gives me a way to help other people who do want to help themselves. And I think that that's really important.
Awesome, Alisha. Okay, well, right there, we're going to shut her down. And I really want to thank you for coming back, and third time is a charm. This was a great interview. We'll just keep being friends in the fellowship of the Spirit, doing what we're supposed to do, and keep carrying the message. So thank you for coming, and I hope, sending prayers to your dad and to your family, and I hope everything in life goes the way that it should, and the best for you, Alisha.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for tuning in to the UDR Cast. We hope you have enjoyed this episode. The viewpoints and the opinions expressed today were solely of the individual sharing them. If you resonated with this episode, please follow us and share this link with anyone that may benefit from it. Please visit us at billward.life to see everything that we have going on. We can recover, one person, one family, one community at a time.